Let me start with a scene you probably know too well. You're watching a commercial. Just a regular 30-second spot about a father surprising his daughter at graduation. Nothing profound, nothing life-changing. And yet, tears are streaming down your face while everyone around you is scrolling their phones. Or maybe it's a song, a melody that catches you off guard in the grocery store, and suddenly you're fighting back emotion in the cereal aisle, wondering what the hell is wrong with you. Here's what I need you to understand right now. Before we go any further, nothing is wrong with you. For too long, we've treated easy crying as something to fix, a flaw in your emotional circuitry, a sign that you haven't grown up or developed the armor that adults are supposed to have. But the science tells a completely different story, and that story is going to change how you see yourself forever. Your tears are data, not damage. Let's talk about what tears actually are. Most people think crying is just an emotional overflow, like your feelings got too big and spilled out through your eyes. But neuroscience reveals something far more sophisticated. When you cry easily, your limbic system, the emotional processing center of your brain, is operating at a different threshold than most people. Think of it like this. Imagine emotional stimuli as sound waves. For most people, their emotional alarm only goes off when the volume reaches, say, level 8 out of 10. Your alarm is calibrated to level 4. This isn't a malfunction. This is precision engineering. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on sensory processing sensitivity shows that approximately 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system that processes emotional and sensory information more deeply. Your tears aren't a sign of fragility. They're a sign that your system is picking up frequencies that others are completely missing. When you cry at that commercial, you're not overreacting, you're responding to the subtext, the musical cues, the actor's micro-expressions, and the universal human longing for connection all at once. Your brain is synthesizing layers of meaning that most viewers don't consciously register. You're not too much, you're just tuned differently. The crying advantage nobody talks about. Here's where it gets interesting. Research published in the journal Social Neuroscience found that people who cry more frequently actually have superior emotional intelligence. They score higher on tests measuring empathy, social awareness, and the ability to read nonverbal cues. Let me break down what this means in practical terms. While someone else is listening to the words in a conversation, you're simultaneously tracking vocal tone, body language, breathing patterns, and the emotional climate of the entire room. You're running a diagnostic scan that would make a supercomputer jealous. This is why you often know something is wrong before anyone says a word. This is why you can walk into a room and immediately sense tension that everyone else is oblivious to. Your tears are the visible output of an invisible advantage. Think about the people in history who changed the world. Artists, writers, activists, healers. The vast majority were people who felt deeply and cried easily. Their sensitivity wasn't despite their impact, it was the source of it. You cannot create art that moves people without first being moved yourself. You cannot fight injustice without feeling the pain of injustice in your bones. Your tears are not holding you back from greatness. They might be the prerequisite for it. The biochemistry behind the breakthrough. Let's get scientific for a moment because this will blow your mind. When you cry emotional tears as opposed to reflex tears from dust or onions, your body releases a completely different cocktail of chemicals. These tears contain stress hormones like cortisol and endorphins, which are natural painkillers. In other words, crying is your body's built-in pressure release valve. People who cry easily aren't accumulating stress. They're processing and releasing it in real time. Meanwhile, people who suppress their tears are storing that stress in their muscles, their organs, and their nervous system. A study from the University of South Florida found that 88.8% of people report feeling better after crying. But here's the fascinating part. The people who felt the most relief were those who cried in the presence of someone supportive. Your tears aren't just releasing stress. They're a social signal. They're a biological mechanism designed to activate care and connection from others. When you cry, you're not being weak. You're being strategic. Your body is literally recruiting help and support from your environment. This explains why crying alone in your room sometimes feels hollow, but crying with a trusted friend feels like medicine. Your nervous system is designed for co-regulation. Your tears are an invitation for another human to witness your pain and help you carry it. That's not dependency. That's how humans have survived for millennia. Why society got it wrong. So if crying is so beneficial, why does it feel so shameful? The answer is cultural conditioning, and it runs deep. Most modern cultures, especially in the West, have inherited a Stoic philosophy that equates emotional control with maturity. We've created a world that values productivity, efficiency, and emotional suppression. Tears slow things down. They make people uncomfortable. They interrupt the flow of business. But here's the trap. We've confused emotional regulation with emotional suppression, and they are not the same thing. Emotional regulation means you can feel your feelings fully and choose how to express them appropriately. Emotional suppression means you're shoving your feelings into a locked box and pretending they don't exist. One is healthy, the other is a ticking time bomb. The irony is that people who cry easily are often masters of true emotional regulation. You feel the emotion, you acknowledge it, you express it, and then you move forward. You're not carrying around decades of unprocessed grief and rage like emotional baggage. The person who hasn't cried in 20 years isn't strong. They're dissociated from their own humanity. And let's talk about gender for a moment, because this is where the shame gets weaponized differently. Women who cry easily are labeled as hysterical, manipulative, or unstable. Men who cry easily are labeled as weak, unmanly, or broken. Both messages are toxic, but they serve the same function. Keep your emotions locked away so the system can keep running smoothly. But the system isn't running smoothly, it's falling apart. Rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide are skyrocketing, precisely because we've taught generations of people that feeling is dangerous. Your tears aren't the problem. The problem is a culture that has lost its capacity to hold space for human emotion. Now let's be honest. Not all crying is created equal, and context matters. If you're crying so frequently that it's interfering with your daily functioning, that might be a signal that something deeper needs attention. Depression, anxiety, and unresolved trauma can all lower your crying threshold to a point where professional support becomes important. But there's a massive difference between clinical symptoms and natural temperament. If you cry during movies, songs, and meaningful moments, but you're still able to function, work, and maintain relationships, you're not mentally ill. You're just wired for emotional depth. The key question is this: do your tears serve you, or do they drain you? If crying brings you relief, clarity, or connection, then your tears are working as intended. If crying leaves you feeling exhausted, ashamed, or more confused than before, that's when it's worth exploring with a therapist. Your tears can be both a gift and a messenger. Sometimes they're telling you that you're alive and connected. Sometimes they're telling you that something in your life needs to change. Learning to distinguish between the two is one of the most important skills you can develop. There's also the phenomenon of crying as a release for emotions you didn't even know you were holding. You might cry during a movie about a mother and daughter, not because the movie is particularly sad, but because it's touching something unresolved in your own relationship with your mother. Your tears are often smarter than your conscious mind. They know what needs attention before you do. The hidden cost of not crying. Let's flip this conversation for a moment and talk about what happens when people don't cry. There's a growing body of research on alexithymia, which is the inability to identify and express emotions. People with high alexithymia don't cry easily, not because they're strong, but because they've lost connection to their internal emotional world. And the consequences are devastating. They're more likely to develop chronic pain conditions, autoimmune disorders, and cardiovascular disease. Why? Because emotions that aren't expressed psychologically get expressed somatically. Your body keeps the score. That tightness in your chest, that knot in your stomach, that chronic tension in your shoulders, those are often unexpressed emotions trying to find a way out. People who cry easily are actually protecting their physical health by giving their emotions a direct route of expression. You're not weak. You're preventing your body from having to scream what your tears are already saying. Building a life that honors your tears. If you're someone who cries easily, you cannot live like someone who doesn't. This is where most people go wrong. They try to force themselves into environments, relationships, and lifestyles that were designed for people with thicker emotional skin. You need something different first. You need people who don't punish you for feeling. Surround yourself with friends and partners who view your tears as information, not inconvenience. The right people won't tell you to calm down. They'll ask what you need. Pay attention to how people react when you cry. Do they get angry? Do they dismiss you? Do they make it about themselves? These are red flags. The people who deserve access to your emotional world are the ones who can sit with you in your pain without needing to fix it or make it go away. Second, you need space for emotional processing. This might mean daily journaling, regular therapy, time in nature, or creative expression. Your emotions are like water. They need somewhere to flow. If you don't create channels for them, they'll flood everything. I'm talking about actual dedicated time, not just crying when you're overwhelmed, but creating rituals where you intentionally check in with yourself. Maybe it's a Sunday evening where you listen to music that moves you and let yourself feel whatever comes up. Maybe it's a monthly session with a therapist where you unpack what you've been carrying. Third, you need to rewrite the story you tell yourself about your tears. Every time you catch yourself thinking, "I'm so weak," replace it with, "I'm so alive." Language shapes reality, and the words you use about yourself become the truth you live. This isn't just positive thinking. This is cognitive reframing based on actual neuroscience. Your brain believes what you repeatedly tell it. If you keep calling yourself weak, your brain will start looking for evidence to support that story. If you start calling yourself sensitive, perceptive, or emotionally intelligent, your brain will start looking for evidence of that instead. And finally, you need to stop apologizing. Stop saying sorry every time you cry. Your tears don't require an apology any more than your laughter does. Think about it. You would never apologize for laughing at something funny. You wouldn't say, "I'm so sorry, I know I shouldn't be laughing right now." So why do we apologize for tears? Because we've been conditioned to see them as an inconvenience to others. But if someone is inconvenienced by your authentic emotional expression, that says everything about them and nothing about you. The world needs your tears. Here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. We're living in an empathy crisis. We're more connected than ever through technology, yet more isolated than ever in reality. We've built a society that rewards emotional detachment and punishes vulnerability. Social media has created a culture of performance where everyone is fine, thriving, living their best life. Meanwhile, behind the screens, people are drowning in loneliness and despair. Into this landscape, you arrive. Someone who feels everything. Someone whose tears are a reminder that we're all human, all fragile, all connected by the same fundamental experiences of love, loss, joy, and pain. Your tears are not a personal problem. They're a cultural necessity. When you cry at injustice, you're keeping our collective conscience alive. When you cry at beauty, you're reminding us what we're fighting for. When you cry at connection, You're modeling the vulnerability that every relationship requires to survive. The people who dismiss your tears as weakness are often the people most terrified of their own emotions. They're projecting their fear onto you because your openness reflects what they've lost. Don't let their fear become your shame. We need people who cry at commercials because it means there are still people who haven't become numb to human connection. We need people who cry at music because it means there are still people who can be moved by beauty. We need people who cry at the news because it means there are still people who refuse to accept cruelty as normal. Your tears are resistance against a world that wants us to stop feeling, so we'll stop questioning, stop caring, stop demanding better. The permission you've been waiting for. So here it is. The permission you've been waiting for your entire life. You're allowed to cry easily. You're allowed to feel deeply in a shallow world. You're allowed to be moved by things that don't move others. You're allowed to prioritize your emotional truth over other people's comfort. Your tears are not a design flaw. They're a feature. They're proof that in a world trying to turn humans into machines, you've remained stubbornly, beautifully, defiantly human. The next time someone tells you that you cry too easily, look them in the eye and understand something. They're not diagnosing you. They're revealing themselves. They're telling you that they've disconnected from their own emotional depth, and your presence makes them uncomfortable. That's their work to do, not yours. You don't need to change. You need to find your people, honor your wiring, and trust that your sensitivity is not something to overcome. It's something the world is desperate for, even if it doesn't know how to say it yet. Your tears might make people uncomfortable, but comfort has never been the metric for what matters. Impact is, connection is, truth is. And your tears contain all three. So cry at the commercials, cry at the songs, cry when someone shows you unexpected kindness or devastating cruelty. Cry because you're alive and awake and refusing to sleepwalk through this brief, precious, devastating, beautiful life. Your tears are not weakness. They're proof that you're paying attention. And right now, attention is the most radical act of all.